So good morning, everyone. So we're going to start with a meditation, and then I'll ask if you've got questions from the class last week, and then we'll progress from there. So here's a meditation on their attention to what's happening in our minds. So it's very important, as we discussed, trying to catch when our minds just have a little bit of irritation or impatience. So it doesn't finish up being, as it sometimes does, that suddenly we're full of anger, because then we've already lost it. So just settling into whatever's a comfortable position for you, with your back relatively straight, and just paying some attention to your breathing. Just breathing naturally, not trying to change anything. But in whatever way it's helping you, whichever breathing meditation you want to use that helps you, just bring your attention and keep it on that coming and going of your breath. And this is to help us move away from our distractions and deepen our concentration. And create an altruistic motivation for this session. Thinking that we're doing this not just for our own individual benefit, to understand our mind and how we can develop particular qualities in the mind, but also we're taking this time to do that, to become kinder and wiser, and take that kindness and wisdom into all our interactions with others, so it benefits them as well. So focus your attention on the opening of your nostrils, being aware of the very subtle sensations as you breathe in and as you breathe out through your nose. There are subtle sensations as the air passes over the small hairs in your nose, cooler sensations as you breathe in, warmer as you breathe out. So just focus on those sensations, not following the air into your body or out into the environment. Just aware of those very subtle sensations. So you can think of yourself as being like a gatekeeper, just watching what comes and goes, the people coming and going, whatever else coming and going, just through that gateway of the opening of the nostrils. And over time, people find some breathing meditations more useful than others. Some might make a mental note of in as they breathe in, out as they breathe out. Some count the breaths. Whatever it is that you find most useful for you. All the things that we practice in meditation, hopefully we're able to also bring these into the rest of our time between meditations, that they become useful for all the other things we do. So distractions are quite normal. Our attention can be distracted by thoughts or sounds or sensations in your body, things like itching or discomfort. But when you wake up and realise that your mind's distracted, simply just acknowledge that, maybe saying, making a note of thinking or sensation, but don't be upset. Don't think, I can't do this. Don't make judgments. None of that's helpful. Just gently disengage from that thought and return your attention to the breath. So now, with a deeper level of focus and concentration, just loosen that concentration slightly and have more emphasis on the mindfulness, allowing your mind to be attentive of whatever comes in to notice, whatever it is it notices. Not following those thoughts or images or ideas, just being aware. Just observing whatever arises in the mind and then letting that pass, seeing what comes next. So this can be, it's said to be a bit like a tourist. When you just watch things happen, we're not getting involved with them. We're not trying to change them. We just see the things we've come to see as a tourist. So this is like being a tourist in your own mind. So this is the bare attention part, just being aware of what it is. And as we gain more practice over this kind of meditation, we can observe each time the mind wanders from the breath, we can note specifically how and where it's wandered. Does our mind automatically go to thoughts about the past? Does it go to things that are happening in the present? Are we distracted by the current things happening in our life or fantasizing, planning how they might go? We learn what kinds of thoughts attract our mind's attention. And we can think about what do these thoughts, these distractions indicate about the things that play a role in our life. Do we always, when we leave our mind, do we blank when we're just trying to see what passes through it, not actively directing it? Do we start worrying about the future? Do we come up upset about something that happened maybe quite a long time ago? What is it that's just under the surface of our mind? And what sort of role are those things playing in our life now? And so throughout the day, we can check whether or not we're being mindful. If we're just doing routine tasks, We always know what our mind is doing. Our meditation is not an isolated activity, and our mind goes off and does whatever when we're doing routine sorts of activities. So it is part of our mind, these things that are just under the surface. And our mind can spend a lot of time worrying about things we can't change. And that can impact our life. So then we'll dedicate all the positive energy and effort you've created doing this practice of mindful meditation to becoming more aware of what it is that happens in our mind and the influence that has on the decisions we make, and that we develop more peace in our life and able to bring that peace to others every time we interact with them, every day. So then, were there any questions from last week? Were there any things that you thought of during the week that you'd like to ask about?
Michael, we can't hear you.
Oh, I would just say none for me.
Okay. Well, you asked a very good question last week about what do we do with our anger and how do we deal with it. So in that class last week, we talked about things we can do more or less in the moment, but in the long term, to have a greater way of managing our anger, we need to develop the antidote. So the antidotes are the opposite thing, like heat and cold. They cancel each other out. So patience is one of the antidotes to our anger. And so today we are going to talk about how we develop that and strengthen it so it becomes stronger than our anger. So did anyone else ask the question?
No, but they're nodding as you're saying these things.
Oh, okay. So if we think of heat and cold as the opposite, and so if there's just a little bit of heat, if you've got an ice block and you just put your finger on it, that's not going to melt the ice block, even though your finger's warm. But if you pour boiling water on it, that'll melt the ice block. So these two things are opposite, and it depends on how strong each other is, how much stronger boiling water is than the warmth in your finger. So the definition of patience that we're using here, this is translated as patience, but having implications of forbearance. It's one of the implicit things within this definition, the ability to bear things without becoming irritated or angry. So this takes quite a bit of practice in my case, and probably for most of us, because we have this familiarity with being, irritated when something goes wrong. So when others do things or things happen, it doesn't necessarily have to be a person. Things happen and we become upset. There are two types of patience we can practice. One is to not thinking about retaliation, because if it's a person, then that usually makes things worse. And accepting that we inevitably have sufferings in our lives. Samsara has lots of sufferings, and sometimes we can deal with them easily and sometimes not. So we need to have this in our mind that no one has a samsaric rebirth that doesn't have some suffering. Being born, being hungry, being all sorts of things, little bits of suffering. But if we become impatient and retaliate with anger, then the situation, of course, just gets worse and more harm, more suffering. So it doesn't mean that we condone abusive situations, that we don't remove ourselves from the situation when we can, that we don't report abuse, that we don't seek help. But we need to be aware that the substantial cause for our suffering is because we have the karma from past lives of in our upset states doing things that have caused harm to others. And so we don't remember whatever, but we don't want to create any more. And we want to purify the karmic seeds that we have. So if we don't stop the cycle, it just goes on and on and on. So I don't know how many of you have ever been in the emergency department of a hospital, but if someone who's sick or insane or under the influence of drugs starts fighting with the staff, they restrain them. They don't become angry. They don't fight back. They understand it's the nature of that particular illness. And so they restrain the person and confine them in a way that they're not going to harm others, not going to harm themselves. And so the disturbing emotions that cause the anger actually inflicts suffering on the person themselves as well as others. And so the Dalai Lama has said that many people think to be patient is a sign of weakness. I think it's a mistake to think like that. Anger is a sign of weakness. And often when people become angry verbally and physically, it's because they can't think or can't bring to mind a response that is logical and reasonable and coherent. And so they're frustrated with the situation, but also with themselves. And then they can't think of any other response but to become angry. So we're going to look at if you can strengthen that patience, if you can strengthen ways to behave differently, that's what we're going to try and do. So we've got that antidote, strong antidote. Joni Davis said that mental unhappiness is the fuel for anger. So if we're already unhappy about something, something's happened that displeases us, that can give rise to those negative things like anger and spite and resentment and belligerence. And so once those things have erupted, it's very hard to control them. So then we need to be aware of the disadvantages, but then look at what we can do. And Geshe Zopa says impatience is a milder form of anger, but it has that potential still to cause harm for others as well as ourselves. And it mightn't be as excessive or even as obvious as when we're angry, but there's still some level of suffering, and we have most of all disturbed our peace of mind. If we're impatient, our peace of mind's gone out the door, so then it's just waiting for something. So when we don't bother to eliminate our impatience, when we don't see it as a problem, it easily transfers to anger with just one more little thing. So in Australia, we've got this saying, the straw that breaks the camel's back. So camels can hold a lot, carry a lot, but there's a stage where one more little thing is going to be too much. And so while we have impatience, it's only going to take one little thing to kick us off into aggravation, agitation, anger. So like in the meditation, being aware of what's in our mind and intervening really early on can be a big benefit. So it's sometimes that impatience, that irritation, sometimes seen as the thief. I can't remember the thief who can steal our peace of mind, steal our ability to be positive when things go wrong. So we're quite familiar very often with quite strong emotions that really upset us and upset others. And so it's a gradual process. We have to have patience to develop patience. It doesn't just automatically happen because we think it's a good idea. So each time our afflictions arise and we allow them to go on and get stronger and tell ourselves that we're in the right and that person's in the wrong, we're just becoming more familiar. Our mind's more familiar with this path, this well-worn path towards afflictive states of mind. And so Geshe Sultram says, even if it takes 10 or 15 years, it's still a great accomplishment to really develop our patience, to be stronger than these afflictive states of mind that we're so familiar with now. If we do nothing, we just become more impatient and more easily angered, and we definitely achieve nothing. So we start wherever we are in trying to develop our patience. And there are situations where we can be more patient generally, and then others where we easily become impatient. And so even if we've had, lifetimes of something that we can't see, we don't want to necessarily, and that it aggravates us in this life and disturbs our peace of mind, we certainly don't want to take it into future lives. Now, while we have this human rebirth, while we have these precious teachers, while we have this opportunity, this is our time to start working on developing our patience and losing our familiarity with those negative states of mind. The thing is, if we think it's going to be really easy, we set ourselves up to fail. We need to not become discouraged. So patience is a third of the 6 perfections, if many of you will have heard of 6 perfections. So in the progress on the spiritual path, we have to perfect these 6 perfections. And so the first 2 are generosity and ethics, and the last 3 are joyous effort, concentration, and wisdom. So we don't perfect one and then move on to the next. We gradually develop them all, a little bit of each. A little bit of wisdom can help us understand why we need to be patient or why we need to be ethical and so forth. And gradually over time. So there are 3 types of patience that are described in the teachings, and sometimes in different orders and things like that by different teachers. But the important thing is that we gain some understanding of each. So the first type of patience is forbearance, this ability to tolerate a bit more irritation, a bit more rudeness, a bit more of something, and gradually we have more tolerance for those things. If we can face our personal difficulties, enduring harms, new ones coming, abuse, negativities, without becoming angry or retaliating, this is a good start. To practice patience with everyone in our life, understanding that they're just like us. They have suffering. They have past familiarity with these things. And so when we can respond calmly rather than in an impulsive way, people notice the difference. I did have some contact with a prisoner, and he'd been transferred to one prison, this happens in Australia, and then he'd come back to a prison he'd been in earlier. And he said people tried to rile him up, and when he was the first time in this prison, he would respond, he would go off, and he said other people tried to rile him up, but of course he was irritated by what they did. Having studied Buddhism and been with Liberation Prison Project and read a lot, he'd developed much more tolerance and patience. And he said it was quite funny. People would say and do the things where previously then he'd gone off and lost the plot and been restrained and put in solitary and all sorts of things. And now he was able to ignore it. And so then they stopped doing it, of course, because they weren't getting any response. So even in those really difficult situations, he was able to develop his mind. So if he could do that in maximum security, high security prisons, then I guess we can follow his example. So it's hard when things go wrong, but in that sort of situation where everyone's sort of having a go to see if they can get a response, then of course it must be much more difficult. And appearing outwardly patient, but inside we're in turmoil and things are all batty, then that's really just hanging on to resentment, waiting for the opportunity. So that we get to that stage of just last straw, and then it's built up over time. So that's not really helpful. If we can hold it together and remain patient, but then examine what it was that made us impatient, that sort of thing, that can definitely be helpful. But if we just keep hanging on to it and becoming more and more resentful, that's definitely not helpful. So we need to be careful about that. What is it we're hanging on to? Are we just becoming all tense and tight? And that last little thing will set us off. So
I have a question, Venerable, about that, because it's really tricky in the heat of the moment to be able to tell the difference between that, because everything in me is going, don't retaliate. And so it is squishing down that immediate urge and agitation. And so then I don't retaliate. So how can you tell what's the difference between actually like working through it or just suppressing it till the next time? How do you know, like in your own experience, how can you tell?
well, I think you have to think about how much it'll play on our mind often later on. I should have said this, I could have said that, whatever it might be. And if I'd said that thing, that would have really upset them, or what, you know. So if it's playing on our mind, going back to that meditation we had at the end of last set, looking at how could we have played it out differently, even though we maintained our calm outwardly, what is it we could have done inwardly? Would it be helpful to see that person's suffering? Would it be helpful to find a different way to prevent whatever the situation was, to help them see a different way, or for us to see it in a different way? How about our own harm we're doing to ourselves by hanging on to too much, and thinking about, could we ward this off? Could we see it coming in the future? This upset this person last week. Is there some way we can, prevent the situation arising where they became upset and that sort of thing? Because we need to, also be careful of not becoming angry with ourselves. But yeah, sometimes people go for a run on the beach or something to relieve that immediate tension, whatever it might be. Then for the future, what is it we can do to keep that situation calmer for ourselves and the other person? So this is a true story. When I first went to Chenrezig as a nun, most junior nun, one of the jobs the most junior nuns traditionally get is doing water bowls, because it's pretty easy. But I sort of had done water bowls, but kind of in my own version of doing water bowls. So one of the nuns showed me how to do them. I was happily doing that, I don't know, one day a week or whatever it was. And one time when I was doing it, another nun came in and said, "Why are you doing it that way? That's not the way to do water bowls. You do them like this." So I just said, "Okay." But who showed you that? So anyway, the senior nuns, and I stayed right out of it, the nuns we have at Chenrezig have often come from different centres and studied in different places. So when they all talked about it, it turned out there were 3 different ways they were doing the water bowls, and all 3 of them were fine. They were just different. They weren't right or wrong, just different. They all incorporated the same things, but so they just quietly discussed and found out the situation and things like that. No one got upset. No one got impatient. No one said, I'm right and you're wrong.
They didn't make you do all the bowls all again. The other
No, they didn't do that. So sometimes when there's a difference of opinion, it can be like that, just with logic and finding out. It's both ways are good or all ways are good. Yeah, so wouldn't it be lovely if we could resolve all our differences that way? So, from the perspective of a bodhisattva, obstacles and enemies give us a chance to practice our patience. If everyone was a friend and we never, ever ran into any obstacle, if everyone just said yes, how would we ever perfect patience? We'd never have an opportunity. So very few of us can take that approach, but if we were happy all the time, then it'd probably be quite nice. But I think most of us run into obstacles and, try to push back against them, deflect them, whatever it might be. But we can use, and that's not necessarily a wrong thing, but if we have obstacles and we develop anger, as we said, that usually just makes it worse. So if we can see these as opportunities in the bodhisattvas, they can see, those who harm us as our benefactors. They give us an opportunity to progress on the spiritual path. But at least it might take us a while to get to that, but at least we can, do whatever we can not to make the situation worse. So if we can work through solving problems and accept that life will present us with difficulties, and if we can be compassionate with ourselves and with others, we can develop the patience necessary to deal with the bigger things when they come along. And like the man in jail, when he came back to that prison, people were quite surprised that they could no longer rile him up and then have the entertainment of watching him lose the plot. It's a bit sad that that was what they tried, but anyway. So there are a couple of stories about people who, with, really extreme patience. So Mahatma Gandhi, when he was in England one time, he saw a man trying to carry 3 suitcases and it was really difficult for him, of course. So he offered to help. And so he carried 2 of the suitcases and they went to the man's house. And when he put the suitcases down, they fell over. And the man who owned them was so upset that he slapped Gandhi. And so Gandhi didn't respond at all. And then the man opened his bag and was trying to pay him. And Gandhi said, I didn't carry these for payment. I carried these to help you because you were struggling. So then, of course, the man was really upset and regretful because he'd assumed that Gandhi had offered because he was wanting money. And so sometimes we don't even understand what it is, the motivation that people have when they're trying to be kind. It's very easy to think, yeah, what do you want? Well, maybe that's just me. Maybe that's just my cynicism. And there's also a story about Lama, a teacher who travelled to Tibet at the request of the Tibetan king at the time, around 1,000 years ago, I think, but I'm not really good with the time, so don't quote that. So he took a cranky cook with him. One of our nuns called anyone who upsets her, the Bengali tea boy, because of this story about a teacher. And a teacher took this cranky cook because it gave a teacher the opportunity to practice patience every day. But then later on, he sent him back to India because he found trying to teach Dharma to the Tibetans gave him heaps of opportunity to practice patience. And I'm pretty sure some of our geshes trying to teach us Westerners, they don't need a cranky cook. It takes, I think, a lot of patience and things like, because it comes from such a different culture, a different approach, and they're so kind and they teach us again and again, and we try to put it into practice and we fail, and yeah, so. So are there any questions about that first type of patients? Forbearance.
Honorable, I have a question.
Yeah.
Do you feel like when meditating to do this, do you feel like visualizing yourself going through these processes is helpful? Or do you feel like it's maybe stirs up more anger and makes it more difficult?
Well, I try to find another way. If when I look at how I responded in different situations, and some of it's pretty embarrassing, um, but if I look back a fair way to things I've done at different times in my life and things like that, and I think, oh, I wouldn't respond like that now, having had this opportunity to study Dharma. But we, as we're growing up, we learn different ways to deal with things. And if we just look at the situation and think, well, I was justified, I was right. I had every right to get angry. But when we look at it, it often makes the situation worse. If someone's done something, especially if it's to provoke us, and then we get angry, and then it just is fuel for each other's anger, there's no benefit. And if we're looking at practicing a Dharma path, we're looking to be um, help others and help ourselves to find a way through the problems that we have in life. And if one person can remain calm, that can bring calm to the situation. Like that poor man in jail, he had a whole pile of people trying to provoke him, but eventually they stopped it because he didn't respond. So if we're trying to apply the teachings into our ordinary life, so if we can think about, okay, that's what happened, but what would I have liked to have happened? How would I have chosen? How would the Dalai Lama have, like the Dalai Lama said, think about me, or think about someone who you think of as responding really well in difficult situations, and I sometimes think, what would Tara be doing here? Not what I'm doing. And so one of the things that we first, Geshe Sering said, initially it's very difficult to control the mind, but if we can control it to the stage where we're not saying and doing something, even though our mind's stirred up, if we can initially not voice all our opinions and not physically throw things around or whatever, then at least we're not impacting others so much. We're not creating as much negative karma of actually physical and verbal non-virtuous actions towards others. But then working on the mind's more difficult, and we need to think about how is a different way I can react and have planned ahead if it's something that comes up again and again. So some things happen once in a while, and very rarely, maybe only once in your life. But there are some situations that will come up again and again and again. And one of the situations that used to come up for me very often, because I drive a lot and have all my life, is, sometimes on the highway you're doing 110 and here comes someone who wants to do 130 and jumps from one lane to another because they want, and who knows what stresses they've got in their life. And I never tooted horns or yelled at. I never did anything like that. But I'd sometimes in my mind be thinking, well, if we all drove like you, blah, blah, blah. But now I just think, be safe, be safe. So that's my only one, but it's such a marked difference over time that I've come to be able to develop in my mind. Everything else is probably just the same as it ever was, but I have been able to, I have lots of practice, lots of opportunities to develop patience in that situation. So, and retaliating in kind in that situation can go very wrong. So, yeah, it was a good one for me to start with, I guess. Is that helpful?
Venerable, it sometimes like begs the question in a way that, well, if everybody drove better, drove safely, then I wouldn't need to be patient.
That's possibly true, but if we were we'd be the one person. If everyone else was driving safely and we were impatient, we'd be the one person driving in an unsafe way. So I'm not sure if that's helpful for you, Michael, with your question.
I'm not sure. Michael's just disappeared and turned into a tree.
Oh, right.
But Jay,
okay.
Jay just put into the chat, he translated the 110 kilometres an hour equals 66 miles an hour. So I think they're miles.
Well, they do have miles, but I can't remember what the miles are because we lost miles quite a long time. I think it was 35 miles an hour in town and 60 on the highway or something. But some parts of our highways are 110 kilometres where there's not a lot of intersections or anything like that, or they're very controlled intersections, and some parts are 100. And every time for the next 2.5 months, it'll be every week pretty much that I'm on that highway. Once up to Tenraysi, once back to Lungaritamba Centre. So I had lots of opportunity to practice that one, a bit like the cranky cook Atisha took to the best. Yeah.
Michael's back now,
So was that helpful, Michael? No.
Yes, that was very helpful. Thank you.
I'm sorry that some of my examples are possibly not things that apply to everyone, but I can only really, I suppose, use the examples I have in my life. I don't have a tea boy, though. I don't have a cook. Anyone that cooks for me is wonderful.
I think your examples were quite helpful.
Okay, so yeah, finding things that we use that come up in our life again and again. These are the ones, if we're going to devote a lot of time to developing patience, we get tested again and again. And so we can see, is our response improving? Is our mind more settled? Are we more settled? Like, for all I know, those people that are zipping in and out of the traffic, driving faster than 110 and whatever, they could be precision drivers as far as I know. They, maybe they're perfectly safe, but if I did that, I don't think it would be safe. Yeah, so. And so the second type of patience then is the patience that applies to our spiritual practice. And so it enables us to endure whatever physical and emotional difficulties we sometimes face as practitioners. And so if we understand the importance of accumulating merit, then we won't back away and, we'll develop the good heart that will give us the strength to persevere. So becoming patient with learning to sit still, learning to concentrate instead of just daydreaming, Many Dharma centres are on hills. The one up at Chenrezig, where I live, very much up a hill. There's all these little things. But, there's many other things, waiting for traffic so we can cross the road, all sorts of things to get to the centre. There's the heat, the cold, the getting up early in retreats. If we're going to become Dharma practitioners, we can't easily walk away from these things. But we do need to, dress for the weather and look after our health and all those sorts of things. So we'd be very fortunate that we didn't have some discomfort. But if we've got that goal of wanting to develop our Dharma practice, we can see, well, it's not so bad. And, the thought of 8 nungnays and things like that can be a daunting thing, but people who've done 8, and I've never done 8 in a row, say it gets easier and easier. The first one's the most difficult one. And so, and doing it in a group, sometimes this can be very beneficial because everyone's doing that thing and support each other and things like that. And sometimes some of the teachings are more difficult than others. Sometimes we want complete total peace and quiet, and then someone else is forever chatting or dropping stuff or whatever. So we have to be realistic. These minor things that we can't change, they're only a problem if we let them become a big thing in our life. And so for some people, some of the teachings are really quite difficult. Things like death and impermanence can be difficult for some people. And if that remains something we haven't addressed, then of course, when it comes to the end of the life, people are very upset. So hopefully most Dharma practitioners have come to some understanding that this life ends more than just intellectually. Intellectually, we all know that. But so sometimes when people start studying the teachings on emptiness, they feel disturbed by it because it seems like there's nothing to hang on to, and that seems very scary. But gradually with time, we come to see that, things are empty of inherent existence, including us. So it just seems like a very challenging thing to take. But if with patience, with persistence, then we can become patient with these changing timetables and all these different things, because it's such an important thing in our life. Being disturbed by these little things, they're so irrelevant. And, compared to really understanding the Dharma, we should be able to easily see the advantages and put aside our discomforts. And then our third type of patience is this Ksanti, patience and tolerance, the Buddhist art of being able to maintain a positive approach even when things go wrong. So this has this aspect of endurance. And so this is sort of like when we have this patience in the face of all these difficulties. And when we look at the lives of the Tibetan refugees and the teachers like His Holiness and Lama Zopa, and Zopa means patience, and certainly Lama Zopa had a lot of patience with us. I heard that once when Lama Yeshe died, Lama Zopa thought he'd just go back into retreat, go to Laudo Valley, and someone had to go and say, please, please, please come back to help us. And all the things that he did and the sickness he had and all those things, always patient and kind and never showing, irritation and anger. So when we look at these examples, but even in much less exotic, less wonderful ways. If we look at people who work outside, farmers, fishermen, all these different people who drive long distances with trains carrying all sorts of things that we need to eat and whatever. You know, they go through all sorts of hardships away from their families, all this sort of thing. Extreme conditions for temporary rewards, just for this life. And they don't become angry at the weather or the traffic or whatever. It's just part of how they earn their living. And we're looking at how we change our life, not just for this life, but for future lives, and achieve really high spiritual goals. So if we look at that, we can think, why can't we put up with a little bit of discomfort, like cold food or an uncomfortable cushion in the gompa or a mosquito bite or something? You know, if we let these small things upset our minds, we're really, if we look at other people and the things they're able to tolerate, quite amazingly things that. So we need to sort of start with developing our minds, practicing these little things, because at some time we're likely to come up against some of these big challenges. In Australia, Australian citizens are unlikely to become refugees, but it's not impossible. And we're all sooner or later going to face sickness and death or a serious accident, you know, where we die really quickly. But we're likely to face more and more difficulties in those sorts of things, those really serious sorts of friends, families with sickness. So training our mind when we've got a mosquito buzzing in our ear or whatever it might be, without becoming angry, then this is beneficial and helpful for us and also for others when we can help them when they're facing these difficulties. And so in this way, we can think of that it's like transforming these smaller irritations, agitations into situations that to our advantage, they help us. They help us develop this patience and tolerance for all sorts of things. Whatever it is we're going to face, if we can be patient and tolerant, and we'll be better able to understand the situation, better able to manage, to think clearly about what are good options in this situation. It's very easy if I think I said last time, if someone's angry and irrational and illogical because their minds are disturbed by anger, it's very easy to disregard what they say. Even if they say something really helpful, it usually comes out in such a way that it's not clear. And so it's very unfortunate. But that's often the way people respond in a sudden, situation. So we've got to start gradually with these little things. So if we have this ability to remain calm and not retaliate, this is the main antidote to our anger. And initially, as I say, it can be that we don't retaliate verbally or physically, but then we have to deepen that. So eventually anger doesn't even arise in our mind. Irritation doesn't arise in our mind. If you watch His Holiness, Lama Zopa, the Geshis, there's not even a hint of this in their face when they're facing these difficult situations. I have quite a range of cynical and whatever expressions that I've got to be very careful about with my face sometimes. And that's because familiarity, habit, whatever. But yes, I saw a photo, someone sent me a photo of myself, and I was talking about something, who knows what, but it looks like I'm the situation was fine. There was 4 of us sitting around having a lovely lunch. But whatever I was talking or saying, I'd pull the face. And I said to her, looks like I'm going to eat your lunch. So we can't necessarily be aware of all our facial expressions. But, it's if we physically don't respond with anger, if we verbally don't respond with anger, that's a very good start. Then we can work on the mind and see that there's no benefit to responding with anger. It inhibits our ability to find a good response and I don't mean response in a cynical way, but I mean find a solution to whatever the issue is. Yeah.
Venerable, I have another question that it seems the thing that, especially with being patient in like the little situations like the mosquito or the weather or the things like that, that the thing that makes me the most impatient is just not wanting it. And so funnily enough, I love watching those long distance trucking shows like Ice Road Truckers and Outback Truckers and things, because they do have that forbearance and a kind of almost a love of those difficulties. And so in my mind, I just think, just like them, just go down into a lower gear and relax instead of, because it's the fighting against it that makes it unbearable. Instead of, like the weather, fighting against the weather, it's not going to have any effect on the weather. But yeah, so this going into a lower gear. But I mean, how can you tell the difference between something to relax about or something where you should actually respond?
Well, sometimes we do need to respond to situations, of course, especially with any danger and things like that. Avoid, whatever danger might potentially be there and things like that in the driving, but also in personal interactions, in situations we find ourselves in where we might be more vulnerable, more in danger, and we have to be in those situations to ask ourselves what's a good way to do this so as we do maintain our calm, so as we don't, if we know someone's going to be upset about something, that we at least start off with us being calm as much as we can. And yeah, in some situations we just have to accept things like the weather, the day you want to do your washing or whatever. But in that situation, it's best to use the dryer or put off till another day, not go getting yourself upset because it's the weather. It's just the weather. And so, but even those things, they can help us with the patience in our mind, with strengthening it so we don't respond. We go, we just, oh, well, I have to use the dryer today or hang the washing, so rather than blah, 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 every time I rain, we can go on and on about these things. It's like we don't put them down. We can still be carrying them around. And there's a story from obviously a time of nomads and whatever, where two monks were walking to somewhere, and they came to where there was an elderly lady who was trying to cross a stream, and one of the monks picked the lady up and carried her across and then put her down on the other side. So she was safe. And hours later, one monk said to the other, you just broke your vows, you touched a woman and you're not allowed to touch a woman and blah, blah. And the first monk, the one who carried the lady, said, I put that lady down hours ago. Why are you still carrying it around? Why are you still carrying her around? Meaning in your mind, you're still going on about this thing. That was a bodhisattva act, wasn't it? To help someone who was in difficulty. But then he'd just gone on. Whereas the other one was still in his mind, questioning, is this what were you doing? So, you know, how long do we hang on to stuff? How long do we hang on to the length of time it took to get through the supermarket checkout? How long do we hang on to that person who was rude or whatever? And sometimes we hang on to things that there is no need. Whether we leave it or we hang on to it, there's no need to hang on to it. And it's only upsetting our mind by hanging on to it. The other person's gone off to do whatever, they've forgotten about it. So the way we can check, you know, how is it that we need to, in caring for our mind, have we put this aside? Okay, it was an upsetting thing. We can think about, would there have been a different way, a better way to deal with it? But going over and over in a way of just criticising ourselves or whatever is just disturbing our minds and setting up that situation, as Geshe Sopa said. We've got that fuel there, one more thing, and then there will be a verbal response we regret or a physical response we regret. So sorting it out in our mind is this. So if we know there's something we'd like to do differently next time, we're prepared. We've got that sorted. We'll try that next time. Or sometimes you can know that someone is going to be upset about something and you can just change it, do it in a different way, whatever. Yeah. Guessing that can be a bit difficult though. So does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you very much.
So, yeah, one way to see people who are angry is, like we were saying, they're suffering. They've already got so much suffering they can't stand it, and so it's coming out of them. So if someone was suffering with anything else, if someone was suffering with a broken leg or whatever, we wouldn't get angry. But if they're angry and upset, if we get angry back, we're just increasing their suffering and our suffering. So if we're the one who doesn't have the difficulty, why wouldn't we be the one who helps calm the situation? So it says that the real work of patience happens in the quieter moments, when we've removed ourselves from the situation or the person that upsets us. And then we can take a deep breath and let go of those feelings and find the space to honestly admit that maybe we weren't always skillful ourselves. And so, and look at that. What could we have done more skillfully? We can't change the other person. We can't change that situation. That may never happen again. It may happen in a week. But what is it that we could have done? And some things, like the weather or whatever, it'll keep on being as good or as bad as it is, but there's very little we can do about it except to protect ourselves from sunburn and freezing cold and whatever. Similarly with our mind, some things we need to protect our mind. And if we can develop that tolerance, that patience, that anger doesn't arise, this is the best protection we can have for our mind. This is complete protection for our mind. No matter how much we respond, no matter how much we get in there to help, whatever it might be, like fully ordained monks helping little old ladies, you know, whatever it might be. Yeah. So Shantideva said that he sort of used the analogy, there are so many things that irritate or annoy us physically. He was talking about in the physical world and then applying that in our mind. But in the analogy in the physical world would be trying to cover the entire world with leather so we don't get prickles in our feet, where it's much more practical to just wear shoes. And so similarly, in our mind when all those irritations, all those little barbs and discomforts, they're not going to go away. We need to protect our mind. So Thich Nhat Hanh, the Vietnamese monk, he said, I wouldn't look upon anger as something that's foreign to me that I have to fight. I have to deal with my anger with care, with love, with tenderness, with non-violence. So we need to regret the times that we fall to anger or irritation or whatever it might be, whatever level of disturbed mind, but avoid becoming angry with ourselves, because that's just one more source of unhappiness that can escalate to a whole pile of other things. So, yeah, just like we need to be kind with others, we need to be kind with ourselves. And sometimes that's the hardest. We can see others' physical suffering or their anxiety, distress, and we try to ignore our own. So are there any questions?
Just checking. No.
Venerable.
Okay.
Oh, yes, Michael.
I think you talked, if I remember correctly, you spoke about a little bit about this last week, but can you comment a little bit more on the difference between anger and wrath?
Oh, yes. So it's in the motivation. In anger, it's our motivation is harm. If it's briefly, anger's the wish to harm, whether it's to harm a physical thing that we throw out the window or toss in the bin or whatever we do, or to harm a living being. They've hurt us in some way. We want to retaliate and harm them. And so, of course, there's many, many definitions of anger. And in general, when we're angry, we overemphasize the negative aspects of that thing, and we want to harm more than they've harmed us even. And so it's based on these afflictive states, one of the three poisonous minds being ignorance, anger, and attachment. Wrath is based on compassion, kindness, wishing to protect. It's the protector deities that are wrathful. They're inner and outer protectors of Dharma. The Dharma centers, the Dharma teachings, and also the Dharma we're trying to develop in our mind, protecting us from interferers or harmers of the Dharma. So I think I used the example of a parent, and they've got a child who keeps doing something that's dangerous, running on the road, sticking their finger in the fire, whatever it might be, going close to danger, basically. And so they're trying to teach the child not to do that. And so they tell them why it's dangerous. They tell them why they shouldn't do it. There'll be harm, whatever. But if the child keeps doing it, sometimes they have to become quite forceful with their language and be really strong in their language and say, if you keep doing that, you won't be able to play in this area, you won't be able to play on the beach, you won't be able, whatever it is, because you're not safe here. And threaten to remove them from the situation entirely or whatever it might be. And sometimes have a fierce face or a raised voice. But the basis, it is to protect the child now and teach them how to protect themselves in the future from danger. So it's based on compassion and kindness. So does that explain it more clearly?
Yep. Thumbs up.
Thumbs up. I can't see the screen, but Miffy interprets it for me.
Sorry, yes, Venerable, that was great. Thank you.
No, that's okay. Because I'm glad you asked the question, because the thing is, if you got the question, it's possibly, also others have that question. But there is a very distinct difference in the intention the motivation. And motivation, sometimes the teachers say it's like 50% of our karma comes from the motivation. So we need to be very clear about our motivation.
Venerable, when I said sorry, I meant for giving you my thumbs up when you don't see the screen.
Well, it's because I'm technologically incompetent. I'm old, so I can claim that incompetence as justifiable. Yeah, so then how we can look at how happy patience leads to happiness. And the benefits are quite extraordinary, really. It can help us to personally feel safe and supported, because whatever happens, we can enjoy company with other people, and not have that like it's going to be a terrible thing if something goes wrong. Most things will go wrong. We're in samsara, but it's whether we respond in a way that makes them more wrong, more difficult, or in a way that helps reduce that difficulty. So Indira Gandhi, she was the Prime Minister or Premier or something of India, said you can't shake hands with a clenched fist. So, if we want to become friends with the person, if we want to maintain a good relationship with a person, you can't be waving your fist around. So patience starts with each one of us. I can't develop other people's patience. They can't develop mine, which is the second one's a bit unfortunate. But anyway, we have to be responsible for developing our own patience and tolerance. And imagine if we were never going to get irritated again ever in our life. Nothing was going to make us upset or irritable or push our buttons, never feeling our body get that tightness that comes with the irritation. And that's probably that ferocious face there. Sorry. So, and not, going on and on over about it for hours and thinking about, oh, I should have said this, or why didn't I, If we're doing that in a positive way, thinking what would be a better way to respond when it happens again, of course, that's beneficial. Yeah, but as we've said a few times, once anger gets going, it's very hard to control. So trying to not leave a trail of regret when we leave this life, not leave a whole lot of, shattered relationships and things like that, because the teachings say we just come back to the people we've been close enough to have had an argument with. We're going to meet them again in future lifetimes. And if it's been a fraught relationship in this life, it's probably going to be fraught in the next life. So even though we might never see some of, when you leave work or school or whatever, we can still have in our mind the wish that they find happiness, the wish that they be free of suffering. And then this is the opposite to when we were angry with them and yelled at them. And when we can develop that in our mind, this really reduces even if, as I say, we never see them, from our side, if we come to see that they have suffering, they have pain, they react like that because anger has taken over their mind, just as people who are drunk react like a drunken person because drunkenness has taken over their mind. When we can see it in that sort of way, then we can have compassion for that person. And it can be very difficult. And when I first came to these teachings, I thought, yes, I wish you had more happiness. You'd stop being aggravation to me. Which is like, a difficult place to imagine I would start there, but at least it was better than thinking worse things. Yeah. And that's, in the meditations, I say, even though we don't know all the people and all the animals and all the living beings, we can have that great compassion, wishing them be free of suffering. So practicing patience, it's in a way to take the power of our mind, that our minds can be this powerful. Our minds can overcome letting those external irritations set off agitation and aggravation and anger in our mind. It's a way of having power over external things by changing them, but by us developing our own inner strength, that we don't let it affect us. And yes, we can start with the minor little things, the things that we know we're going to meet up with relatively often. It's no good putting a lot of effort into something that's happened once when we're 50 and probably never going to happen again in our life. But if that's going to be a good example for us to practice with in our meditation, in our thinking, in our reflections, then yeah, use it like that. So if we can develop our mind so that, a bit like the meditation at the beginning, where we can see very early on when our mind's starting to be disturbed, when we get to know the situations where our mind is going to be disturbed, we might always find it difficult in this or that company of these people or whatever. Then we can be more vigilant at those times, and we can think about how we deal with them in a way ongoing. We're more vigilant in that when we know they're coming, like when we know we've got a doctor's appointment or something, but also in the future, what is it that we can do to help the whole situation, to prevent it becoming, just because every time so-and-so gets drunk at Christmas and starts an argument with someone else, is there any way to change that? And if there's not, well, just prepare your mind, it's probably going to happen. So patience can give us the flexibility and strength not to be a victim of circumstances, to be prepared for the things that are likely to happen. And it's like having a suit of armour, in that when things are going to go wrong, but we're not going to be upset about them in a way that impedes our capacity to benefit if there's the opportunity to benefit. And which doesn't mean we just become passive or resigned. It just means that we have figured out a way we're going to try to respond that's a calm, peaceful way, an appropriate way, and where we retain the ability to think clearly. Our mind's not all disturbed and disrupted by agitation or anxiety or whatever. We've got a bit of a plan, we'll put it into practice, see how it goes, may or may not work. This is samsara. We do our best. And some people do seem to be almost born patient, but that would be because in past lives they've developed that patience and it comes more easily to them. Just like some people can easily learn maths or write poetry or something. I'm not good at either of those things. So, we can use this opportunity, this life we have as humans, having met the Dharma, to develop our minds, and developing patience can be very useful in this life, and then we're familiar with it, take it to our future lives. And so there are some things that were written, I'm not sure by who, saying by practicing patience, we have fewer enemies, we won't be separated from our family and friends by, bad relationships. Happiness and contentment this life and in future lives. And we can die without regret and have a good future rebirth. And here's a thought to contemplate, is what I called this little thought. Someone said this to me in a teaching. The teaching was not this particular teaching. And he said, life's not about waiting for the storm to pass. It's about learning to dance in the rain. So learning to enjoy life in spite of all the obstacles that come up. So, because the obstacles will continue to come up. Yeah.
We should do the meditation.
We should. I'm right here now. Were there any questions before we do the meditation? We're doing meditation on patience. Okay, so sitting in whatever's a comfortable position for you and generating motivation that for the benefit of all those that I meet, may I be able to generate the perfection of patience and completely abandon anger. And then just bring your attention to the breath, coming and going through your nostrils, slowing your breath a little. So patience is having an undisturbed mind, even while encountering the problems, even while being harmed by people. We need to be able to keep our peace of mind and not lose our love and compassion for them. Once the conditions for harmful intent, which are the familiarity with harming in the mind, the object being close, and wrong thoughts, once these are complete, then the harmful intent will come up in us, whether we want it to or not. At present, we're conditioned in a way to regard anger as something, a beneficial response sometimes. So therefore, we can have a willingness to become angry in certain situations. And to overcome this, we need to think deeply about the faults of becoming angry and the benefits of practicing patience. So the benefits of patience: if I have a cool stream of patience that pacifies the fires of anger, I won't suffer from losing my mental happiness. I'll have fewer enemies and less interference. I'll experience happiness in this life, and at the time of death, I'll die without regret. And the disadvantages of anger: there's no negative emotion as destructive as anger. One instant of anger has many negative results. Not only does it create negative karma that will ripen as suffering, it destroys the positive states of mind already generated and prevents them from returning. There are some aspects of anger I can see. When my mind is poisoned by anger, I cannot experience peace. Existing joy and happiness are destroyed and are difficult to regain. The mental stability arising from the practice of seeing all beings as equal is destroyed. Anger robs me of my sleep and harms my health. Having a stressed and unhappy mind is one of the main conditions for anger to arise. If I can do something about my problem, there's no benefit to getting upset. If there's nothing I can do about my problem, there's also no point to getting upset. So one way to look at patience is it's about not letting yourself be affected by harm. So some people, when they're harmed, are able to think this poor person is under the control of the demon of anger. I should not get angry. Rather, I should feel compassion because this person is suffering. I should help this person, not harm them. Someone under the control of anger is like a person under the influence of alcohol. They have no control over their actions. Once the conditions for harm are complete in them, mind, it will arise whether they want it to or not. And they're compelled to engage in a harmful action that inflicts suffering on others. So recall a time when someone said something disagreeable or insulting to you. And look at whatever harm was actually received. What was the harm? How were you harmed? Aren't the insulting words merely sounds travelling from the mouth of the other person into your ear and then registering in my mind? So there's no physical harm being received. And then what happens in our minds, this is the one thing that's under our influence. This is something we can decide. So this being didn't harm me in a way that I can't use that to develop my patience. So there's no basis for the anger. The only thing that can really harm me is my own anger. For some people, when someone says things that are harmful, they see this as a blessing, an opportunity to practice patience. If I only see the negative side of people who cause me difficulties, I'll be overwhelmed. I must find the beneficial side of experiencing problems. Working towards seeing problems and hardships as being kind, because they teach us to avoid non-virtue if we want to avoid the experience of suffering in the future, and to practice virtue if we want to experience happiness. These problems and hardships also teach us about the suffering of others. This is the one benefit about suffering, is that we can have compassion for others that suffer. And we can think that in the same way as I put up with suffering to cure a disease, having injections, operations, whatever it might be, I put up with the suffering of those because I want the benefit of being free of disease. In the same way, I'm going to deal patiently with problems to cure the disease of anger and the imprints of it, of being angry. This creates karmic seeds and imprints in our mind. And patience is the way to prevent any more of those coming. So dedicate all the positive energy you've put into this class by doing the meditations, listening in your mind, working with your mind, seeing how you might apply these in your life. Dedicate all of this to be able to develop perfect patience in ourselves and in our relationships with all other living beings. And then when you're ready, just slowly open your eyes. So my timing's pretty good this time.
Thank you, Venerable. That was wonderful.
So anyone have any last minute questions?
No, but they're smiling at you, Venerable.
Well, you know, patience, it's a long way, a long journey. But we've had a long time with, you know, irritation and all these things. So we've always got something to learn, a bit more patience. But remembering not to become impatient with ourselves, this is very important. There used to be this saying, God, give me patience and I want it right now. Try not to have it quite like that. Yeah.